So me and my buddy Walker decided we're going to play through The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time together. I know the title of this video would suggest otherwise, but I swear there's a good explanation for that. One day me and him were chopping it up, talking about how we wish we had more time to play video games, and he happens to mention how he really wants to play through all the mainline Legend of Zelda games, starting with Ocarina of Time. Coincidentally, I've had a copy of this game for like 8 years, but have only fired it up like once. And it was in that moment, we both looked at each other, and we decided we were done putting it off. We decided that no matter what, we were going to experience that magnificent game together.
And then we figured, hey, why stop at just Ocarina of Time? Why not make a whole spreadsheet of the games that we've always wanted to play? And so we did. We compiled our backlog into a single glorious spreadsheet, and upon reviewing the countless hours of gaming that lay before us, there is only one thing we could say.
Let's do this! This is what we're going to be playing on. I bought this N64, as well as this game with my first paycheck from my first job, so of course that's the version we're going to be playing. So we meet up, fire up the game, play through the entire first section with the Deku Tree and all that, and then we called it a night. We were feeling triumphant. We really were. That is until we meet up a couple weeks later and came to a rather disheartening realization. Walker? Where's save file?
Did we forget to save?
Yeah, it turns out that the battery had died in my copy of Ocarina of Time, leaving it incapable of saving our progress. Which makes sense, considering it sat on my shelf collecting dust for like 8 years. So we had a bit of a difficult decision to make if we intended on continuing forward with this. Hey, you have Majora's Mask, don't you?
Yeah.
You want to just play that?
Sure.
Alright, cool. And with that, Walker and I instead began our arduous journey through The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. What is this? After we learn the difference between a jumper pack and an expansion pack, that is.
You see, you can play through most of the N64 library with a jumper pack. However, there are a handful of games that require an expansion pack in order to play the game. We were not aware that Majora's Mask was one of these games, so we had to order an expansion pack before we were able to start playing the game. We ended up spending a night playing Super Ghouls and Ghosts instead. But once we did finally have all the pieces in place, we were finally able to just play the game.
This game picks up right after the events of Ocarina of Time. We're not really sure what happened in that game, considering we haven't played it, but apparently Link has left Hyrule in search of a friend with whom he parted ways with when he fulfilled his heroic destiny. I like that. That is just poetic right there. Anyway, the game starts off with us just walking through the forest, minding our own business, until some scoundrels scared our horse, knocked us unconscious, and then stole our ocarina. And get this, when we attempted to confront them, one of them, the one wearing a funny looking mask, turns us into a Deku scrub. And that's just it. We end up stuck as a Deku scrub. And he just leaves us with nothing but our Deku Scrub selves and this fairy named Tattle, who aided him in the abduction of our horse, but is now expecting us to help her reunite with her brother, Tail, and their buddy with the silly mask, who once again stole our horse. You know, that's the thing. I'm really just upset about the horse. Like, I just want my horse back.
You do like horses. While in pursuit of Skull Kid, we met this mask salesman who says that the kid who stole our mask and turned us into a Deku scrub also stole a mask from him, Majora's Mask, I presume, and that if we want to return back to normal, we'll need to snag the mask off of him. He also mentioned that he was short on time and that we would need to retrieve the mask within 3 days. So we agreed to handle that for him since we didn't really have any other choice.
Once we were finally let loose and allowed to roam freely around Clocktown, we had absolutely no idea what we were supposed to be doing. We spent 3 in-game days wandering around talking to random people who kind of seemed like they didn't like us. Like, a considerable portion of those 3 days were spent getting mauled by this one dog. At the end of the 3rd day, Walker and I stood in the middle of town, utterly defeated. All we could do was watch as the moon came crashing down on us and presumably wiping out everyone we hold dear. Okay, alright, I guess that's what the mask salesman meant by being short on time. For those who don't know, The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask runs on a 3-day cycle that will inevitably result in the Skull Kid pulling down the moon and Link immediately being sent back to the beginning of the first day, after dying a horrible fiery death along with the rest of Termina. The only way to prevent this calamity is to defeat Skull Kid before time runs out, or at least that's what we gathered. Needless to say, our first 3-day loop was an utter failure.
That was horrifying.
Yeah, I didn't like that one bit.
I knew that was coming, and yet that was still just horrifying. Eventually, we figured out that first we had to go find the ferry that, depending on what day, is just floating around different parts of town. I don't understand how we ran around for 3 whole days and never caught a glimpse of this ferry, but anyway, we took it back to the Great Fairy Fountain and got this cool ability to shoot snot bubble. With that ability, we were able to pop this balloon, terrorize some children, and then find the secret passage to Merlin's observatory. We don't actually remember if that's this guy's name, but
Old man Merlin was kind enough to let us use his telescope to catch a glimpse of Skull Kid on top of the clock tower, as well as the moon tier landing right outside the observatory. Once we snagged that, we were able to buy the flower from that business scrub in South Clocktown, which then provided us the means to launch ourselves to the upper level of the tower. Ooh, now that we know where this charlatan, now that we know where he's been hiding,
we're about to go whoop up on this
what
boy.
He said. After doing a few side quests around town, all that was left was to get to the top of the tower and wait for the doors to open. And when those doors opened, and we finally confronted Skull Kid, we started blasting.
You did start blasting, but not before Tell mentions that you have to head to 4 regions and bring them here.
Who is them?
I don't know. That's all he said, though. Anyways, we started lighting them up with our little magic snot bubbles. We were trying to beat the game right then and there, but he did not like that. He dropped the ocarina after taking 1 little hit, which allowed us to play the Song of Time and return to the beginning of the first day. And once we got our ocarina back, we were able to head back to the mask salesman who would teach us the Song of Healing and return us back to normal. Interestingly enough, the Deku's abilities stay with us in the form of a Deku mask. And just from looking at the menu, we can see that this is the first of many masks that we'll acquire in this game.
I feel we should also mention how unhappy the mask salesman was about us not retrieving the mask for him. But he kind of never told us that the moon would come down if we didn't, so I feel like that makes us even. Anyway, now that we're back to being regular Link, we can finally leave Clocktown and explore the rest of Termina. Remember how we said we weren't going to focus too much on side quests?
Yeah, I remember.
Remember how we said that before we even started the game?
Yeah, I think I remember.
Alright, just making sure. With nearly every notable event in this game being so time sensitive, we initially weren't interested in doing anything outside the main story. But it didn't take long for these silly yet charming side quests to win us over. For example, when you purchase that flower in front of Clock Tower, not only do you obtain a deed for that tiny plot of land, but you have the option to submit your proof of land ownership to some random guy in desperate need of toilet paper. And as you can imagine, he does indeed use it as toilet paper. What about this? In the wee hours of the night right outside Clocktown, you can encounter a sad ghost who is lamenting the fact that he died before his dance moves could become popular. But or this, there was the option to thwart a robbery. A bomb robbery.
Are we really gonna have to sit here and watch this old lady slowly make her way into town?
Yeah, it looks like it.
Oh, hold up. What is this fella up to?
Oh no. Somebody better stop that guy. Anyways, we ended up doing nearly all the side quests in Clocktown before confronting Skull Kid. It really helped pass the time. With all of that out of the way, our next point of interest was the swamp. We ended up playing through this section of the game like 3 times. And the reason for this is because apparently we can't read, but more on that later. So the first thing we encountered upon entering the swamp was this little welcome center type establishment with a magic bean salesman out front. We figured these would come in handy later, so we went ahead and bought some. Kind of weird how this salesman only sells to Deku clientele, but maybe it isn't. I mean, he is a Deku after all. with the magic beans until we made our way inside, hoping to get a tour through the swamp, or at least some insight on how to get past the giant ox rock blocking the path to the next area. Unfortunately, the tour guide was missing. According to her sister, who runs the magic potion shop down the way, no one has seen her for a hot minute, so it was up to us to go find her if we wanted to get to the other side of the swamp.
With the help of our little monkey friend here, it didn't take long at all to find her. Kinda weird how she only accepts your help if you approach her as a human, though.
Is that gonna be a recurring theme in this game? Anyway, we give her the potion, she flies off on her little broomstick, and we make our way out of the woods of mystery, but not before being approached by more monkeys, asking us to rescue their brother who's being held captive in the Deku Kingdom. And wouldn't you know it, after taking the tour through the swamp and mowing down that Octorok that was blocking our path, that's exactly where we were headed. Might as well see what kind of predicament this monkey has gotten itself into. It doesn't sound right saying monkey that like that, I don't know why.
It almost just sounds like, it sounds bad.
They're actual monkeys though.
Apparently, the Deku King is accusing this monkey. Apparently, the Deku King is accusing this monkey of kidnapping his daughter, the Deku Princess. However, the monkey insists that the real culprit is a monster dwelling deep within the bowels of the Woodfall Temple. After agreeing to go rescue the princess for him, we are taught the Song of Awakening, which, when played using the Deku Pipes, will grant us access to the interior of the temple. This is probably a good time to mention that the ocarina assumes a different form whenever you're a Deku Scrub, which I think is a really interesting mechanic. I should probably also mention that the Deku King wasn't too thrilled about the monkey teaching us the Song of Awakening, and is now fully convinced that he's responsible for his daughter's disappearance. So we get kicked out of the kingdom with the knowledge that if we don't retrieve the princess soon, our monkey friend will certainly perish.
And with that in mind, we made our way to the Woodfall Temple, and were immediately enthralled by the eerie atmosphere of this sacred place. And it's as if the atmosphere elevated along with the temple as it emerged from the murky waters of the swamp. And we were foolish enough to think that we were ready for whatever was inside. We were not. Going through this temple for the first time as two grown men who were kinda not good at this game was a nightmare. And it's not even like we died a bunch of times or anything. Don't get me wrong, the two mini-bosses that we ran into were a little tricky, but the real challenge came from figuring out where to go, because my sense of direction is atrocious.
It really is. I'm just saying. We spent an embarrassing amount of time literally just fumbling around in the dark, and the constant chanting that accompanied the temple wasn't helping. Before we knew it, we only had like 5 minutes until the moon came down, and we hadn't even made it to the boss room. So we begrudgingly gave up and reset the game, which ended up being a huge mistake.
This little section here is for the folks who aren't familiar with how you save your progress in Majora's Mask. Because as we've been making our way through the game, we've been saving our progress at these cool little owl statues, and they do enable you to hop off the game and continue where you left off. These are not permanent saves. If you happen to, I don't know, load up an owl save and then reset the game, you'll end up getting sent back to the dawn of the first day with whatever you had on you the last time you played the Song of Time.
Even when you do play the song, you lose your stock of items as well as whatever rupees are not deposited in the bank. However, the important difference is that you keep your masks and other key items that you've been collecting, but we hadn't done that. Remember how we spent all that time doing side quests and collecting items? Yeah. So, because it's been so long since we'd actually played the Song of Time, we lost all that. Honestly, I'm not even that mad. The owl statue specifically told us that this would happen if we did that.
Yeah, this one is kind of on us. After we recovered all of our items and made it back to the Woodfall Temple, we found it was much easier the second time around. We managed to make it to the boss room in like half the time. And we were actually starting to think that maybe, just maybe, we weren't completely terrible at this game. That is until we entered the boss room and encountered the masked jungle warrior Odawa.
This guy dropped down from out of the black wielding an absolutely massive sword and made it clear that he meant business.
Yeah.
We spent the majority of this fight in a state of utter confusion and terror. Ottawa, had the ability to conjure circles of fire as well as swarms of insects, all while chanting what we assumed was some sort of incantation. We weren't really sure what was happening, but eventually we beat him. After collecting his remains, we were treated to a brief cutscene involving giants. It's not yet clear what role they play in all this, but it was still pretty cool to see.
And immediately after that, we find the Deku Princess. As you can imagine, she wasn't too thrilled about her father trying to execute a monkey on her behalf, and demands we hurry back to the Deku Kingdom before it's too late. Alright, it says we need to find something to carry her in.
Savannah said try using a jar.
Alright, I don't see how that's gonna work, but I'll go ahead and give it... What?
It did say you could use whatever.
What?
So, anyway, we made it back, halted the execution, and as a reward for rescuing the princess, we received the pig mask. Oh, and since we defeated Ottawa, the swamp is no longer poisonous. And with all that taken care of, we had acquired the first of 4 major items needed in order to defeat Skull Kid. And this time around, we made sure to play the Song of Time and avoid undoing all the progress we've made so far. Now that we've taken care of things in the swamp, it's time we make our way to Snowhead Mountain, which is currently being afflicted by what one of the locals is referring to as an abnormal cold snap. This was a bit of an understatement, considering that while wandering around the mountain, we found this one Goron completely encased in ice. It wasn't until we made it to the shrine that we realized that the frozen Goron was none other than the Goron Elder. Apparently, his son has been crying non-stop in his absence, and it was up to us to remedy that. While on our way to do that, we were stopped by the Great Owl, who was kind enough to lead us to the special item called the Lens of Truth. This item grants the user the ability to see things that are normally invisible to the naked eye. For example, this random shadow floating in front of the owl is actually a ghost Goron, which just has a shadow for some reason. Once this ghost Goron realized that we were able to see him, he immediately led us to the Goron Graveyard.
Look, I'm all for helping out this ghost guy, but we should probably hurry up and unfreeze that other guy like real soon. It feels like we're getting sidetracked.
I'm sure we're gonna get back to that soon.
I hope so. The ghostly Goron revealed himself to be Darmani III, who was supposedly a renowned warrior amongst the Goron people. When he was alive, that is. Darmani met his untimely end when he went off to Snowhead Mountain with the intention of getting rid of the demon that had been terrorizing the locals. While making his way up the mountain, a blizzard rolled through and flung him all the way down into the valley. It didn't take long to put 2 and 2 together and figure out that Skull Kid was somehow involved. Or at least that's what we're assuming. After telling us his tragic tale, Darmani begs us to heal him of his sorrows, which, when you know it, can be accomplished by playing the Song of Healing. And so we did.
It was a bittersweet feeling watching all the sorrow that tormented the proud warrior fade away as he listened to the song. We were treated to a brief cutscene of Darmani standing in front of a crowd of Goron who seemed to be giving their hero a triumphant send-off. It immediately reminded us of the cutscene from earlier in the game when we were finally changed from a Deku back to a human. Once the scene faded to black, all that was left of Darmani was this Goron mask which, much like the Deku mask, allows the wearer to take the form of a Goron. Along with this new form came a number of unique abilities that were absolutely necessary in order to make any further progress. One of these abilities is the exceptional strength of a Goron, which is needed in order to move Darmani's grave and reveal the hot spring hidden beneath. Of course, it took us a while to come to the realization of that. We ran around throwing snowballs and fighting spiders for nearly an hour, before it finally occurred to us that we were supposed to go back to the graveyard.
Can I just say something real quick?
What's that?
I was just gonna say that I don't like how Link looks as a Goron.
Really?
Yeah, I think he looks kind of goofy. Now, Darmani, he looked really cool. I don't understand why we couldn't look more like him.
All the Gorons seem to think we look just like him.
That's true. Yes, to all the other Goron, our resemblance to the Great Warrior is so uncanny that they were all convinced that we actually were Darmani. Anyway, with the hot spring water in tow, we now have a means of thawing out all the Gorons that we found encased in ice, including the Goron Elder. After taking a few seconds to remember where he even was and what he was doing, he immediately begins hurrying back to the shrine. This is him in a hurry, by the way. We thought about walking alongside him to see if it was even possible for him to make it there by himself, but we eventually gave up on that. Upon hearing of just how distraught his son has been in his absence, the Elder attempts to teach us a song that should put him to sleep. But because of just how cold it was, he was only able to teach us the first half of the melody. But fortunately, the Goron Elder's son helped us learn the rest of the melody once we made it back to the shrine. Once completed, the lullaby immediately put him to sleep, and the wailing that had been reverberating throughout the shrine since we first showed up finally ended.
Once we learned the Goron lullaby, it was finally time to make our way towards Snowhead Temple. This section of the map was inaccessible up until this point due to what we assumed was the same hellish blizzard that took out Darmani. However, one glance across the valley using the lens of truth revealed the source of the blizzard to be a giant invisible Goron guarding the temple with ice breath. The discovery that the true cause of Darmani's demise was none other than a giant invisible Goron was baffling to say the least. Dealing with him ended up being a simple matter once we realized that he could be put to sleep by playing the Goron lullaby. With that obstacle out of the way, we began making our way over to Snowhead Temple.
Navigating through this second dungeon was no easy feat, but it did go a lot smoother than the first one. You know, I'm tempted to say that we're beginning to get good at this game, but I'm not going to say that. There were a number of sections where we were required to traverse across narrow pathways and across ramps with a certain level of precision, and we often lacked that precision. Another thing we lacked was a means of getting rid of all this ice blocking off important areas of this dungeon. This was easily remedied once we defeated the first mini-boss and acquired the ability to shoot fire arrows. Now once we got a hold of those fire arrows, making it to the boss room was light work. We found the masked mechanical menace goat frozen in a block of ice like pretty much everything else in this temple.
This boss fight was pretty straightforward. We pretty much just trailed behind him along the circular track for a few minutes until he ran into a wall and blew up. Not the most challenging boss fight, but it was fun nonetheless. Seizing Goat's remains prompted yet another cutscene involving the giants. This time around, we were able to speak to one of the giants who claimed they were guardians, or protective gods as Tattle preferred to put it. The mysterious guardian disappeared before we were able to get anything else out of them. Along with the guardian went the perpetual winter afflicting Snowhead Mountain. It was nice to see the Gorons enjoying the pleasant weather, but we couldn't stick around for long. We had business to attend to.
And that business was with the mountain smithy, to get our swords reforged. Well, our sword, singular sword, reforged. We even went through the trouble of unblocking the path to the Goron racetrack, competing in the race, and winning the bottle of gold dust. This gold dust is necessary in order to have our sword reforged to its ultimate form, the Gilded Sword. I'll be honest, I prefer the look of the previous form, the Razor Sword. Considering we don't have to worry about this sword ever losing its edge, I feel like it's a worthwhile trade-off. Oh, and I forgot to mention that in the process of unblocking the path, we became powder keg certified, and were granted permission to carry powder kegs. Like I like to imagine that the powder keg certification is a physical thing. Like it's like an ID that you have to carry on you in order to have powder kegs in your inventory.
And who would be checking for that?
Like if this was Kingdom Come Deliverance, probably a lot of people. Getting caught with a powder keg in that game without proper certification would probably earn us a flogging at the very least.
Our next stop was Romani Ranch. With the help of a powder keg, we were able to get rid of the massive boulder blocking the path and gain access to the area on the first day rather than having to wait. Speaking to Romani, the girl who was given the same name as the ranch revealed that apparently aliens come down around this time every year and try and abduct all the cows. Romani's older sister didn't believe her, but Romani assured us that they were coming and that it was up to us to defend the barn. Also, our horse was just over there chilling. Turns out, all we had to do was shoot a few balloons and learn a song in order to get him back. Are you satisfied now?
Oh, no, I'm ecstatic. This is all I've wanted the whole game. I just want to say real quick, I was really excited to finally have our horse back until I realized just how terrible the controls are. This thing controls like a tank. We challenged the guys next door, the ranch next door, that is, the Gorman brothers, to a race, and it did not go well. It took us 10 tries to beat those two because of just how awful the controls are for this horse. We ran into similar difficulties when we hit up the Grand racetrack, but I mean, it was nowhere near to this degree. Like, this is terrible. Just look at this. Look, they're cheating. Walker, they're cheating right now.
Yeah, I see that.
Ah! I hate this game so much sometimes. Like, Walker, I loved this game and I loved having our horse back, but this is ruining the horse for me right now.
Once we wrapped all that up, the aliens showed up just as Romani had said they would. They didn't offer up much as a challenge, considering how slow they were, but the eerie atmosphere that accompanied their arrival definitely left an impression on us. Upon successfully fending off the aliens, we were rewarded with a jar of milk, and an invitation to accompany Romani's older sister on her next delivery to town. Along the way, we ended up being chased by two masked assailants who definitely weren't the Gorman brothers. Pretty interesting how even their horses were masked. We successfully delivered the milk after shaking off the milk bandits and earned yet another reward in the form of the Romani mask. This mask apparently serves as proof of membership to the milk bar in the East Clock Town.
Well, here we are, Walker. We're men now. We got our milk mask. We got our inventory full of milk. How do you feel?
I feel like we can go to the bar and drink as much milk as we want now that we're adults. Our parents were always stopping us before, right? You can't drink the whole gallon.
So, apparently the Gorman brothers are just struggling all around.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like they have very much going for them.
Could you imagine them having to show up in town and be like, all right, brothers, spent too much time
Get out the bar.
He's in the milk bar again. With the aid of our noble and apparently invulnerable steed, we were able to easily hop the gates that originally blocked the path to the Ikana Graveyard. There we found the kind of things you would normally expect to find in a graveyard. That being some tombstones, a creepy-looking gravekeeper, and a giant skeleton that will apparently fight you if you awaken them. Now, we're always down for a fight, so we decided to do just that. However, as soon as we woke him up, he immediately turned and started running away, all while conjuring up walls of fire to prevent us from catching up. It took around 3 or 4 attempts before we were finally able to get him to properly engage in battle. It wasn't too difficult of a fight, though, especially considering we had our fancy new gilded sword. After getting smacked around for a bit, the giant admitted defeat and revealed himself to be the former commander of the Ikana army, Skullkita. Our new friend Skullkita was shamed in battle by a loss within his kingdom, and has been waiting for someone to come and awaken his soul ever since. Since we were the ones to both awaken and defeat him, Skullkita deemed us worthy of fulfilling his request. We were tasked with taking his soul from the fiercely burning flame and telling all his loyal men that the war had ended. We weren't exactly clear on the details of this war, but apparently, along with the ruin of the Ikana kingdom came a curse that left many of the fallen soldiers in a state of undeath. Once his request is fulfilled, Skullkita will then be able to drift off to sleep. It was at this point that we began to notice a pattern of Link providing rest to souls who died before accomplishing something important. We say important, but there was that one guy who was just sad that his dance moves never caught on. I mean, I guess that was important to him. After accepting his request, we gave Skullkita permission to finally take his leave. This was an unexpectedly somber moment, considering the ridiculous chase sequence that we had to go through earlier. Skullkita's soul took on the form of a new mask called the Captain's Hat, which grants the wearer authority over the stall children that wander around at night. Believe it or not, we prefer this video not be too long, so we're going to try and get through this next part as quickly as possible. We found a trio of stall children standing guard in the graveyard on the night of the first day. When we commanded them to open up the grave, they did so by just bashing the thing open. I mean, that's one way to get it done, I guess. The inside of this grave was surprisingly spacious. Beneath this graveyard, there was a whole underground cave system. While we were down there, we were attacked by a swarm of bats and an axe-wielding enemy that hit like a freight train. Look at that, that one hit took off like half our health. After defeating this armored menace, we encountered Flat, the apparition of a composer who at one point served the Ikana royal family. Flat gave us a brief bit of his backstory about how his brother Sharp, who apparently sold his soul to the devil, imprisoned him here. Upon being freed, Flat issued a woeful request to memorize the song inscribed behind him and tell his brother that the 1,000 years of raindrops summoned by my song are my tears. The thunder that strikes the earth is my anger. Link obliged without uttering a single word. We committed the Song of Storms to memory and returned to the graveyard with a single heart left. Returning to the graveyard on the second night led to a similar chain of events, minus the encounter with Flat. We opened up a grave, fought the armored guy again, and received a heart container for our troubles. We thought the third night would be the same until we were asked to lead the gravekeeper around in the dark as he searched for buried treasure. We didn't find any treasure, but what we did find was Big Po, but he ended up being pretty easy to deal with. Defeating Big Po netted us another empty bottle, which we later used to contain the wispy little spirit that he left behind. I say later because it took us a while to realize that we could even do this. Once we got all that graveyard business taken care of, we made our way over to the Zora Cape and immediately noticed something peculiar just offshore. Taking a closer look revealed it to be a Zora who was on death's door. We pushed the poor guy back to shore and, as an additional act of kindness, listened to his tragic tale of how he ended up like this. According to Macau, that's this guy's name by the way, the lead singer of his band, Lulu, laid some strange eggs and lost her voice. It was kind of hard to take this moment seriously because of just how hard this guy was shredding while retelling this tale. Anyway, some pirates came along and stole Lulu's eggs and struck down Macau when he attempted to stop them. Now it was up to us to retrieve them as part of Macau's dying wish. We're not sure how we never realized just how many quests we received from the dead and or dying. There were quite a few months in between us finishing the Ikana Graveyard and making it to the Zora Cape, so that's probably the main reason we didn't notice. After giving a most excellent performance, Macau falls over looking as though he might actually be dead for real this time. If you've been paying attention until this point, you probably can already see where this is going. We played the Song of Healing and were shown this doleful cutscene. Despite meeting an untimely end, Macau seemed to be at peace before fading away into nothingness. This Zora mask is the only thing he left behind. Well, actually, before leaving for good, he taught us his farewell song and pleaded with us to retrieve his lady's eggs. We're not actually sure if this is his lady, but I mean, the cutscene, I feel like it was sort of implied. I guess it's up for interpretation. In addition to trouble with the pirates, Macau also mentioned that there was something strange brewing in Zora Cape. At this point, we felt it was safe to assume that Skull Kid was to blame, considering he's been the cause of so many other problems around Termina. Before confronting the pirates though, we made a quick trip back to the southern swamp to buy a red potion, which we then took the Ikana Graveyard to this invisible soldier who apparently has been lying here unnoticed for years. Is he a ghost? We don't know. As a thank you for giving him the potion and healing him of his mysterious ailment, we received a new mask, the Stone Mask, which allows the wearer to walk past most enemies without being noticed. With this handy item in tow, we were able to sneak into the Gruta Pirates' fortress without much resistance. There were only a handful of enemies who could see through our disguise, but they ended up being light work. Entering the pirate fortress required navigating through a maze of underwater pathways, which was about as tedious as it sounds. Swimming freely as a Zora is actually pretty fun, but as soon as enemies or puzzles are thrown into the mix, that's when underwater traversal becomes not so fun. After overhearing a conversation alluding to the whereabouts of the stolen eggs and the pirates' reasons for stealing them, we got a hold of one of the most useful items in the game, the hookshot. This, paired with a stone mask, made finding the 4 eggs hidden around the fortress pretty easy. Retrieving the other 3 ended up being about as simple as clearing out a snake hole. Also, we just want y'all to know that we're struggling not to include some sort of Dragon Ball Z reference in this script. Anyway, once all 7 of the Zora eggs were gathered together, they immediately hashed and aligned themselves to form a song. That song is called New Wave Bossa Nova. It's a song taught by the Zora children that invigorates voices. When we played this in front of Lulu, whatever it was that caused her to lose her voice was dispelled in an instant. It was a really touching moment. However, it was rather short-lived. The sound of Lulu's singing awoke a giant turtle slumbering beneath the cape, who urged us to climb onto his back and handle some business in the Great Bay Temple. Remember all that stuff we said about the underwater navigation being a bit tedious at times? Well, as expected, the Great Bay Temple was much worse. It was at this point in the game that entering any temple stirred up intense feelings of uneasiness in the two of us. So far, the biggest challenge in this game has been figuring out where to go and what we're supposed to be doing. We know we're not unique in this experience, considering that the Legend of Zelda games are notoriously cryptic at times, but it felt like we were just really bad at this game. All these valves and pipelines were just not making sense to us at first. Not to mention that over the several months that we weren't able to meet up and play this game together, we forgot Zora Link had this special energy field attack that he could use while underwater. The first time around, we somehow went through this entire dungeon without ever using that ability. The gameplay capture you're currently seeing is from our second time going through the dungeon. We accidentally deleted our original gameplay, so you don't get to see us truly struggle. Also, this place has one of the creepiest mini-bosses in the entire game. Through much trial and error, we eventually dropped down into the lair of the gargantuan masked fish, Gyorg. Remember how we said we forgot that Zora Link could use the electric barrier? Well, that includes this boss fight as well. The first time we fought Gyorg, we didn't use that ability once, and instead just used the double cutters. That made this fight into a literal nightmare, as this platform was the only safe area in this entire room. Anytime we were in the water for too long, Gyorg would just come up and literally eat us. This attack is pretty much unavoidable, by the way, and it does a ton of damage. This boss fight nearly sent us over the edge, considering it's really hard not to get caught in these jaws at least once. Eventually, after more attempts than we're willing to admit, we were able to put him down for good. Expunging this vile creature from the temple earned us an encounter with another giant. This time, Tattle pleaded with the mysterious creature to help us prevent the calamity that would befall the world if Skull Kid was left unchecked. The only response we received from this giant was, "Help our friend." Tattle assumed that this was referring to the last giant and made them promise that they would help us if we did this for them. Once we got all that business with the Zoras wrapped up, it was time to finally head to the last of the 4 regions, the Ikana Canyon. This hooded figure perched on this ledge initially wouldn't let us pass without the Garo mask. We were told that Ikana Hill is a place where spirits with troubles and lingering regrets wander, and that without the Garo mask, we wouldn't be able to save their souls. Fortunately for us, we already had that mask at this point. We had been going out of our way to complete every side quest we came across, and currently had a pretty stacked set of items and abilities at our disposal. Anyway, after showing that we were in possession of the Garo mask, we were granted access to the Ikana Canyon. The hooded figure was not lying when he said that there were restless spirits wandering around this place. Also, hold on real quick, isn't that the guy who was trying to steal that lady's bag of bombs? The first thing that caught our attention, aside from the bomb thief, was this house being encircled by what looked like mummies. There wasn't much we were able to do there, but we were able to enter this cave over here and confront Flat's brother, Sharp. Playing the Song of Storms cleanses his spirit and removes the curse that he placed on the Ikana River, causing it to flow once more. When the waters from the river began to flow again, something really interesting happened with the house that we saw earlier. After seeing this, it made a lot more sense why the house looked like a music box, and how it was even able to be in a place like this. Immediately after this, we were told by Sharp that we needed to go to the temple and sever the root of the evil curse that torments the Ikana kingdom. Only then would the souls who wander the land be able to rest. Before doing that, we went down to the music box house to help this guy who got turned into a zombie. Healing him of this affliction nets us the Gibdo mask, which makes us look indistinguishable from the Redeads. At least to the Redeads, that is. The Redeads are these mummies that we saw earlier, by the way. We left this girl and her father alone for the time being. It seemed like they really needed this moment to themselves. Next, we made our way over to this underground area beneath the well, which was a bit of a headache to get through because we had to keep running around trading items in order to gain access to different parts of the dungeon. There was this one guy, this one Redead, that requested we bring him some milk. All this running around ended up being worth it though once we acquired the Mirror Shield, a shield with the ability to reflect certain kinds of light. This reflective property was the key to a lot of the major puzzles throughout Ikana Castle. That's where the area beneath the well leads to, by the way. The ancient castle of Ikana had a very grandiose air about it as we made our way around its musty halls. Once we made our way deep into the castle, we eventually unknowingly entered the throne room of the undead king of Ikana. It was clear that he wasn't too thrilled about us entering his kingdom uninvited when he sent his 2 lackeys to dispose of us. They weren't much of a challenge though once we realized they were allergic to sunlight. After dealing with them, it was time to take out the one seated on the throne. Hold on, but real quick, before the fight really began, he had this really funny reaction to seeing us with the captain's hat. This fight ended up being one of the most memorable boss battles in the whole game for us. Taking this guy out was no easy feat, but what we really loved about this fight was that it struck that satisfying balance of being tough but not like cheap. We also thought that these characters were just really cool looking. Once we delivered the final blow, we then witnessed a rather silly argument between the king's 2 lackeys that we just defeated. It served as an example of the kind of petty quarrels that led the kingdom to ruin, and it was none other than the king that called attention to this. After dismissing the 2, the king properly introduced himself as Igos du Ikana. According to Igos, all this started when someone opened the doors to the stone tower, and that in order to restore true light to this land, we would need to re-seal those doors. As a means of aiding us with this request, he teaches us the Elegy of Emptiness, a song that allows Link to leave behind an immobile, weird-faced shell of himself, shaped in his current form. Once we accepted this parting gift, it was time to move on to the stone tower. With how much trouble we had getting through the previous temple, we were fully prepared for this to be an absolute slog. However, to our surprise, it actually wasn't that bad. Don't get me wrong, this temple definitely took longer to get through than the others, but aside from that, it really wasn't that bad. Guess we have the limited number of underwater puzzles to thank for that. A lot of the puzzles around the stone tower were centered around making use of the Mirror Shield and the Elegy of Emptiness. It's also worth mentioning that deep in the stone tower we came face to face with the Garo Master. Our battle with the Garo Master was really memorable, almost entirely because of the aesthetic and the sound design that accompanies this character. Look, the fight itself was pretty good, but just listen to this. We've never heard anything like this. I need this sound isolated so that I can store it in my archive of interesting sounds and keep it forever. If you're wondering why I have an archive of interesting sounds, mind your own business. Once defeated, the Garo Master reveals that the entire temple can be flipped upside down if we shoot a special arrow into the red emblem below the entrance. These special arrows were conveniently provided immediately after this fight. If you were wondering why this temple took so long to get through, it's because you go through the whole thing twice in a way. Our second time through, we had a run-in with this fella here named Gomez, who had the ability to summon a cloud of bats. So far, the entire Ikana Canyon section has been stacked with really solid bosses. This guy beat the tar out of us, but man did he look cool doing it. Anyway, after taking care of him, we acquired the boss key, and later on down the line, the Giant's Mask. After entering the boss room and descending down the massive hole in the center, we found ourselves in a desert of all places. And out of that sea of sand emerged the giant masked insect Twin Mold. Having the Giant's Mask at our disposal essentially turns this into a kaiju battle. It's entirely possible to fight Twin Mold without the Giant's Mask, but let's be honest, this is just much cooler. It was a bit of a bummer to find out that this is the only place in the game where you can use this mask, but it's also understandable considering how that would most likely break the game. Twin Mold was one of the easier bosses once we figured out their weak points, but the spectacle of fighting these two gargantuan insects more than makes up for the lack of challenge. Once we took them both out, we finally cleared the last of the 4 regions Tail mentioned at the very beginning of the game. What followed was a cutscene featuring the final giant that we were asked to seek out. Tail noted that the giant seemed sad when we mentioned that we would need their help with dealing with Skull Kid. The last thing we were left with before they disappeared into the rolling mist was another cryptic message telling us to forgive our friend. It was at this point we began to grow suspicious about what their true intentions were. Before going to the clock tower and confronting Skull Kid, we decided to go back and collect all the masks that we hadn't acquired yet. We had heard that there was a special item we would receive at the end of the game if we had all of them. Since we'd been so diligently completing all the side quests that we came across, this ended up being a pretty simple task. The only one that required a bit of extra effort was the one acquired after finding a missing person named Kafei. This quest was given to us by Madame Aroma, the mayor's wife and Kafei's mother. It actually didn't take long to find Kafei, but what complicated things was the reason why he was hiding. See, Kafei was supposed to be getting married to the receptionist Anju at the Stockpot Inn, but he was unfortunately turned into a child by Skull Kid. Interestingly, he's not hiding because he was turned into a child, he's hiding because his ceremonial wedding mask was stolen by the prancing bandit Sakan. Instead of just telling Anju what happened, Kafei was determined to get his wedding mask back and greet her as promised. After running around for a bit collecting more clues, we eventually found Sakan's hideout. Look, he even made sure to leave us a little sign out front just in case we couldn't find the place. Getting the mask back ended up being a pretty simple matter of grabbing it off this conveyor belt before it drops down into this hole out of reach. We say simple, but of course it took us 2 tries. Once we got the mask back, Kafei was reunited with his lady, their marriage was saved, and everyone lived happily ever after. Except for the fact that the moon was still coming down. Almost forgot we were supposed to be doing something about that. We'll admit, it was a little bittersweet watching this cutscene for the second time. At this point, we had been playing the game for over a year, and although we got frustrated at times, we still had a lot of fun running around indulging in everything it had to offer. But regardless of how good of a time we had, all good things must come to an end. It was time to finally put a stop to Skull Kid's shenanigans. Everything played out pretty much the same as it did last time, with the exception of Link being his normal self rather than a Deku Scrub. Once the fight started, it didn't take long to realize that none of our attacks were having any effect on Skull Kid, so we figured it was time to call in the Giants. cutscene of the four of them halting the moon in midair was incredibly impactful, especially when juxtaposed with the original scene of the moon coming down. And look, fortunately for us, Skull Kid fell unconscious in the middle of the chaos, so we didn't even have to fight him anymore. All we had to do was remove the mask, take it back to the happy mask salesman, and watch the credits roll. Or at least, that's what it seemed like until this happened. It turns out that Skull Kid was being manipulated by the mask all along, and now that the mask no longer had any further use for him, it tossed him aside like he was garbage. Now that the mask was untethered, it continued its efforts to bring down the moon, and from the looks of it, the Giants wouldn't be able to hold it up much longer. So, it was up to us to head up there and settle things once and for all. The scene that greeted us once we made it to the moon was surreal, to say the least. It was clear that we needed to head to the tree off in the distance, but once we got a bit closer, we saw children running around wearing masks, resembling the four major bosses we defeated earlier in the game. We weren't really sure what this all meant, but it was definitely intriguing nonetheless. When we went up and spoke to one of the children, they offered to play a game of hide and seek in exchange for one of our masks. Once we obliged, we were teleported to a dungeon that was very reminiscent of the Woodfall Temple, in that the abilities of the Deku Scrub were the key to getting through it. Once we found the child, wearing the Odawa mask, we had to sacrifice even more masks to be taken back to the tree. This process is repeated with the other children as well, with each game of hide and seek taking place in a dungeon themed around all of Link's unique abilities and transformations. Once we made it through all the dungeons, we pretty much gave up all the masks that we spent all that time collecting. However, I will say that the mask we received in exchange made it all worth it. The only child left after all the others disappeared was the one wearing Majora's mask. When we walked up and spoke to them, we were asked if we wanted to play a game, but since we were all out of masks, the child decided to play a different game instead of hide and seek. Instead, they suggested we play a game of good guys against bad guys, and we were even offered the Fierce Deity mask in order to level the playing field. The Fierce Deity mask is the most powerful mask in the game. You can only use it in boss rooms, but the reason we went out of our way to collect all those masks was so that we could acquire this one in the end. Before beginning the final battle, the child delivered one last unsettling line about how we would play the role of the bad guy, and that all we would need to do was run. Anyway, the Fierce Deity mask, along with all the other boons we acquired over the course of the game, made this final fight absurdly easy. This boss had 3 phases, but we honestly didn't even notice a difference in difficulty between the 3 of them. Now, you'd think that the big finale being this easy would be a bit of a bummer for us, but it was actually kind of satisfying to deliver such a thorough butt-whooping to this loathsome thing. After all the horrible things this mask had done to the inhabitants of Termina, it deserved to be smacked around a bit. So we got to smack it, and within less than 5 minutes, the final blow was dealt. In the aftermath of the battle, the moon that once loomed over Clocktown dissipated, and the residents there were finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. It was finally over, for real this time. As Skull Kid said goodbye to his giant friends, we couldn't help but feel sorry for him. He was convinced that they had abandoned him, and it was the masks that used these feelings of resentment and loneliness to manipulate him. Or at least that's how he interpreted it. It was gut-wrenching to see him realize that they considered him their friend, even after all he'd done. Link offering his friendship to Skull Kid in the end was in our opinion, the perfect way to wrap up this story. Felt like it really brought it home. And there you have it. We finally rolled credits on The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. Over the year and a half that it took us to get to this point, there was a lot that went on in our lives. I switched careers and had a kid, this guy got married, and my best friend, aka this guy's brother, also had a kid. Like we said in the beginning, our entire goal with this was just to take time out of our busy schedules and play some games together. Walker and I are both just regular employed men. Me and him both have CDLs, if that tells you anything about the kind of work we do. Walker was so busy with work he didn't even have time to record any voiceover for the last half of this video. We had some good times playing this game together. It was nice to have something to look forward to every few weeks. My favorite thing is probably how we made a tradition out of eating a home-cooked meal together with our wives in the middle of long play sessions. They didn't play the game with us, but they didn't mind watching us, and they would even look up hints for us if we ever got stuck. Hopefully the next game won't take as long to finish. It was nice of you to stick around to the end. Till next time, take care of yourselves.